number one is on Monday, I did a presentation on why we study Latin. And for those of you that are first time teachers, you may be asking that very question. And I would recommend going to the Memoria Press YouTube channel. Uh, Eventually, we'll probably also have this posted on classicallatin.org, and looking for that webinar. I know there was some technical glitches, so things might be a little choppy, depending, but um, but we covered the basic reasons and really the key advantages. We went through the history and whatnot. The key advantages: vocabulary, grammar, critical thinking, and the most important, that you're able to read the works of Western civilization in their original form. So, uh, if you have not um, heard those reasons explained, that would be something good for you to go listen to. Um, Now, getting on specifically to first form Latin is a beginner Latin course. However, it is not a beginner Latin course that is going to teach you a year or two or three worth of material and then leave you hanging halfway through. We prefer not to leave you on a cliff. First form Latin will teach you over first, second, third, and fourth form will teach you uh, essentially the entire Latin grammar. There's some syntactical things. Ablative absolute is not included, but participles, gerunds, the passive voice, subjunctive, purpose clauses, a lot of the all of those things are included in fourth form Latin. I myself, I taught a fourth form Latin class online. As you can, as could be expected, the fact that I'm doing a webinar, I have taught online before, and I taught a fourth form class, and this was a student that had done first, second, third form. I had a class of, I want to say, 8 to 12 maybe students of fourth form, and there was an eighth grader in the class. And as we finished fourth form, that the end of that year, he asked to be allowed into an online class provided by Memoria Press that that was AP Latin, and so they would be working with Caesar and then Virgil and preparing for that AP test. And he was a ninth grader going into ninth grade, and he and in that class, they're not going over those additional grammar, any really syntactical or grammar concepts. They're just making sure that they can translate. And that student, the teacher asked, "Are you going to work hard?" And he said, "Yes." So he worked hard, and on the AP test, he got a 5 out of 5. So what first form intends to do is really help you master the language so that you can go out and translate or read. You know, when I say translate, oftentimes I mean read Latin. Um, so first form can be appropriate all the way up even into ninth grade, uh, and could be considered a high school credit depending on where you're putting it. Now, how can you offer a ninth grader high school credit for a program that a fourth grader can do? Now, a fourth grader can only do it with prior Latin knowledge. So if they've gone through something like Prima Latina or Latina Christiana, that gives them kind of a foundation, because first form will take off running. A fifth grader or sixth grader could do it with no prior Latin, but a fourth grader really does need that prior Latin. So how can you take what a fourth grader can do and put it in ninth grade? Well, it's equivalent to taking, let's say, a literature course, and you can have a literature course um, that covers, let's say, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and that's worth a high school credit. Or you can have a literature course that's a survey of American literature and is covering many more authors than just Emerson. And so in one course, you may read 4 works, Emerson's works, and the other course, you may be reading snippets of 100 or 200 works. And they're different approaches. The survey course is going to give you kind of a big picture, but no mastery of anything. Whereas the course on Emerson, you could go out and probably give lecture after lecture on Emerson after that course because you've learned it in depth. And that's what first form does. So even though a ninth grader may not get through the amount of material they might get through in a different high school course, they will master the language to the point that they will have facility with it. So it really is appropriate 4th through ninth grades. Um, Now, as I'm speaking, I've been speaking here for almost 10 minutes now. Again, if there's any questions, go ahead, post them now, um, so that we don't, if I have dead time towards the end, um, I will end up just calling it. So give me your questions now and we can just keep going. Um, and any question that came up during those videos that you watched as well are appropriate. And if even if it just came up as you're preparing your lessons for the year, anything along those lines, I'd be happy to deal with those questions. And another thing with first form, to know, I am going to get to a weekly schedule, a suggested weekly schedule. Uh, but if any of you are at a publicly funded school, whether that's a public school, a charter school, a private school that receives public funds for their books, that has a restriction and is could not use first form because there's Christian material in that. We have a separate version that would be appropriate for those schools. Memoria Press does sell a separate version, and you can call and ask them about that because w- the thought is that they do not want students deprived of the ability to or deprived of the chance to learn Latin just because we've put in quotes from Augustine or somebody like that. So we've gone through and made those changes for schools in that situation. But the original version that has those Christian elements is the standard version and is still absolutely available. And so uh, let me get into the weekly schedule. Now, when you're a teacher preparing to teach a lesson, um, I would highly suggest go to the first form teacher manual and um, and read those teaching guidelines. And on page 14, Roman numeral 14, um, there's some great teaching guidelines that are actually very reassuring for a teacher, whether you're a master teacher who knows Latin or one that's just beginning. Uh, and it's actually quite humorous when under preparing to teach the lesson, they say, read the teaching guidelines on the previous pages. Now go back and read them again. And that's true. When we're going to teach a subject, oftentimes um, things need to sink in. So reading it over twice will be helpful. Um, and it goes through there's 5 points there. The student text, each unit has an introductory page. Read that several times because that's giving you the big picture. It's giving you the overview. It's not meant to go into the nitty gritty. And then for each lesson, read and then reread the student text. There's scripted lesson plans, uh, so you don't have to be creating what you're going to say. um, that's very helpful. Listen to the audio, practice your pronunciation, and then do the workbook pages yourself. That's obviously the best case scenario is that you would do those workbook pages yourself, but that is going to help give you a mastery of it. Uh, a lot of times, let's take for example riding a bike. um, if you're going to teach somebody to ride a bike, um, it's eh, first of all, you need to know how to ride it yourself. And you may know all the ins and outs. You may know that, you need to get up onto the bike, you need to even out your balance so you don't fall over. The pedals make it go forward. You may know all the theory, but until you do it, you're you're not going to be the teacher that has the patience to hold on to the back of that bike seat and as the child pedals to make sure that they don't lose their balance. And so doing those workbook pages yourself will be helpful in that regard, and will help you see potential pitfalls that your students will run into. And then, check the answer key, find your errors, and find out why that was why you made that error. And then use the oral drill as a quiz for yourself. And then when it says now you're ready to teach the lesson, do not be dismayed that you do not understand everything. And then they ask the question, who does? Who does know everything? And even a master teacher will run into things that they're like, oh, I don't know the answer to that question. And so as you teach the lesson and you're going through it a second time, you will start to understand more and know more. So when you're preparing, that's very helpful. So I would say go to those teaching guidelines, read and reread, and everything I say, it's going to be pretty much straight out of those teaching guidelines. Now, what would I suggest for a weekly schedule? Well, at this stage in the ball game, recite, recite, recite. So Monday you're going to start off. I'm going to talk about a typical week here, not your very first week. Obviously, you can't start off with recitation because they don't know anything unless they've had some prior Latin experience. Um, but in a typical week, you want to start off with a recitation, and hopefully your school is a Latin-centered school. In which case you have plenty of time for Latin. If you're a 5-day week school, I would recommend about 45 minutes a day. And it's okay to spend 10 to 15 minutes a day um, reciting. Now, if you're doing Latin 5 days a week, maybe you want to keep that to 10. If you're doing Latin 4 days a week, you can go up to 15. So make sure that you are reciting. I went and visited a school once where they were doing Latin, and the administration was concerned uh, that a that the that a certain grade was doing. I think they were doing first form. They might have been doing Latina Christiana or a different program. Um, was concerned that the students might not be mastering the material. Well, we walked in and um, realized that right there in the front was posted um, for all time the grammar forms that they should have memorized. Those wall charts are helpful, but they have to be used sparingly. So if you have one of those pull down maps, you can tape it up on the map and then roll the map up. And so then when the students need help, you can pull it down. The students can be helped with that wall chart, but then when you recite, it goes back up. So then that way the students have to use their memory. So you want to recite, recite, recite. Now, the more your students um, see that you can recite without looking at the book, the more effective it's going to be. So Monday, do a recitation. Take 10 or 15 minutes. It'll be the most effective 10 or 15 minutes of the day. Um, and in that recitation, you can do declensions, conjugations, adjectives, pronouns, anything. Uh, and first form has that scheduled out, so you don't really have to be reinventing the wheel. But you can also do grammar questions. You have the appendix in the back, and as they've been learning grammar, those grammar questions uh, should be really, for lack of a better word, hammered in, so that even if they don't understand, for example, uh, lesson 21, uh, question number let's see here. Question number 4. How do you find the stem of a third declension noun? And the answer is drop the genitive singular ending is. All right. So if a student can memorize that, then even if, let's say they don't have experiential knowledge of what that means. Let's say they don't have the confidence and in the know-how um, that let's say they get to Rex Regis and they think Rex is the stem, and you say, okay, how do you find the stem of a third declension noun. If they have them memorized, immediately they'll fall back on this answer. Oh, I dropped the genitive singular ending is. Oh, I have to drop that genitive singular ending. And so the memorization helps. So you can do those grammar questions. So recite. Um, so for those of you that are joining us, we are doing kind of going over a schedule, a suggested schedule for the week. And I'm just on Monday, right at the beginning, recite. Please do ask any questions you have. You can go ahead and post them on YouTube or in the questions panel on the right if you've clicked to be a part of our conversation on the bottom left. Um, so either one of those places is fine. Well, any questions that you have, I'll be happy to answer. Um, and so first thing you're going to do on Monday is recite. Then you may want to also review vocab. So think of that as kind of one thing. You're going to do recitation and vocab. So to make sure that they're keeping that fresh in their mind um, throughout the week. Uh, well, I'll get to that later about how to quiz vocab. But your students do need to be doing vocabulary practice throughout the week because they're going to be building. They're going to be doing 10 vocab words a week. So for a 34-week school year, you're talking 340 words, more or less, give or take. And so after 3 years, you're ending up with 1,000 words. Those words need to be refreshed and kept, on the tip of their minds. So, and that can be done in different formats. You can just have a stack of flashcards and you just ask each child a question. One vocabulary word. Um, but you do need to make sure in some fashion throughout the week that's kept fresh. So Monday, go through the lesson. Um, and basically, first form already has those scripted, um, the scripted text where number one, it's got the oral recitation or and review, and it gives you exactly what to do. It gives you the grammar review questions to ask. Then number two, you're going to go over the Latin saying. You've got the vocabulary there that makes up the Latin saying, some additional questions to ask. And then you've got the grammar chalk talk, which um, you basically what you can do is read through the student text with the students and then go through the grammar chalk talk. And any derivative work, which is over there on the right. I mean, you can do that vocabulary work either before or after the chalk talk, but it's all there scripted for you. Once you get a facility with Latin, maybe this is your second, third, fourth, fifth year teaching first form. Well, you get to a point where you no longer need that chalk talk, and what you can do is just take the grammar form they're learning. So let's say they're learning the first declension. You take that, you put the first declension up on the board, you talk about it, you talk about the similarities, the differences, what this means. You read the bullet points in the book, and then you just recite that first declension with them 30 times maybe, and then you'll be good to go. So, um, so and I don't know if you're familiar with the disappearing line technique. I'm pretty sure that was mentioned in those videos from last year that are on classicallatin.org that we asked you to watch before this training. But uh, the disappearing line technique is basically you would put up on the board the a arm is um, forms, and then you would recite it with them, and then you might erase the first and so then they would have to say a arm is, where they're still looking at it on the board, but each time you recite it, or after every two or three or four times you recite it, you would erase another form, and it doesn't have to be in order. You could erase another one. You can change that up how that works. But that's a disappearing line technique. So when you're teaching the lesson, you basically put that up on the board. You would go over the bullet points in the student text, and then help make sure they've got that memorized. Now, you might have run out of time by this point in that first day. If not, go ahead and do the grammar section 1 and grammar section 5 of the workbook. So the workbook, I have the teacher key here. Um, is every lesson is split up into uh, 5 sections, basically. Section 1 is the word study and the grammar, so it's making sure that they understand those grammar concepts. If not, that at least they're memorizing them. And they'll copy out their vocabulary and things in that section. Very simple. When I was teaching fourth form online, by fourth form, the kids really have uh, a facility with mastering these grammar concepts. They've been doing it for 2, 3 years already. It's old hat. So I would just go over the bullet points with them, maybe recite it a few times, and then I would go through this word study and grammar and ask them to answer the questions, and then I would get a feel for whether they really understood the lesson or not. So that's good to do on that day because it's going to give you feedback, and it's going to solidify in their minds what what they've learned. So, and then section 5 is enrichment. So if you don't get to it, you don't get to it. That's going to be your Latin saying and derivatives. Now, the great part about first form, one of the great things about first form is that it does give that derivative practice through first and second form. And the students form a habit then of every single time they see an English word, they're asking, is there a Latin stem to this? Is there a Latin root? And so you would want to do sections 1 and 5. Um, okay, now before we go on to Tuesday, uh, there I have not seen any questions come in. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to post them either on YouTube or in Google Hangouts. So and either way, I will be watching for them in both places. So um, eh, so after day 1, when you've taught the lesson, you've gone through grammar sections 1 and 5, you've done your recitation, all of that. What your homework can be, if you haven't finished the enrichment, you can send the enrichment home as homework. Even that vocabulary section in section 1, where they're just copying those vocabulary words. Obviously, the grammar section you want to do in class, but the rest you can send home. Uh, so uh, that the, you can do that homework, but then also assign as homework to make sure that whatever grammar form you've learned, so in lesson 21, I believe that's the third declension, that then you send it home and say, okay, you need to memorize this and memorize your vocabulary. That's the main thing. Um, and then day 2, you can do your recitation, your vocabulary. Now, in your teacher manual, and you've got this recitation guidelines here. You don't need to do those daily. You can break that up into sections. The more you recite, though, the more the students are going to be comfortable with their grammar forms. And what you don't want, Latin is like math. You know, you got to build it up. You can't jump into algebra without arithmetic. Latin's the same way. They can't jump into third form without first form. So if they haven't done first form well, later on you'll end up with students that instead of immediately being able to see a form and say that's accusative singular, you'll have them looking it up in the back of the book. And so that's what we want to avoid if at all possible. So so day 2, do that recitation, do the vocabulary, um, and make sure that whatever grammar form you're learning is included in the recitation. Then go ahead and do section 2 of the workbook. Now, section 2 are generally forms. It's just writing out generally the form that you've learned that week. So again, in lesson 21, that point we're writing out the third declension time and time again. There's it's there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 times, and then we do it alongside an adjective. So we do it 2 more times alongside an adjective. That's an easy section. So you could probably get through that and into part of section 3 on the same day. Now, section 3, those are drills. And so that's where instead of just listing out a whole declension or something, they have to they'll be confronted with something like Dux Novus, and they'll have to translate that into New King, and doing that in the nominative case or the accusative case or something like that, or making an adjective agree with a noun, stuff that they actually have to think about and be able to apply these concepts. So that's a little harder. And if you're not going to be able to finish it all in class, make sure that each drill, so drills A, B, C, D, uh, that those drills that you do at least a few from each section to make sure that they've got the concept and before you send them home to finish it off. Um, and then on Thursday, you can finish off section 3. Section 4 is generally translation, um, translation skills. Now, at first form, translation is seen as a bonus. Learning grammar and being able to translate are two very different skills. And so what we would say is if you have to drop something or if you're struggling with something, let it be translation. Even on the quizzes, you will see that if at the bottom it has a sentence to translate, it is listed as a bonus because they're not expected to be able to do that in first form. Second form, they need to start being able to do it. Third form, they're going to have multiple paragraph translation. That's going to be important. And in fourth form, in their unit reviews, I believe they're translating the parts of the autobiography of St. Patrick. So uh, that's where, in first form, though, that is not our concern. It's not a big deal. You can skip that if need be. Now, the more you do it, the easier it's going to be for the students. Um, any new teachers out there, if you have never taught Latin, an important part of teaching translation, now, as I said, translation is not important in first form, but let me make this point. An important skill to get the students used to is what's called parsing. And parsing is where you take a sentence. For example, uh, agricula nautam vocat. So the farmer calls the sailor, and you're going to take agricola and you're going to say, okay, what declension is it? What gender? What number? What case? And then you're going to do the same thing with now, Tom. And then vocat, that's a verb. So we need to know the person, the number, the tense, the voice, and the mood. Um, and so you have them label that right above each individual word. And then um, they can then deduce, okay, so agricola is masculine, nominative, singular. What case is the nominative? It's the subject case. Okay, great. Well, I know that vocat is third person singular present. Does agricola, can that function as a third person subject? Yes, it can. Great. So we have the farmer calls, and then now, Tom, we've identified as a accusative singular masculine. We know the accusative is the direct object, so my direct object receives the verb, so I know it has to be the farmer calls the sailor. So that parsing, that just saying it's what gender, number, case of a noun or an adjective or a pronoun, and the verb, what person, number, tense, voice, and mood. Those are that's what parsing is identifying every individual word in a sentence so that then you can piece it back together. That's an important translation skill. So that was an aside. Then on Thursday, if you have time, do what's called a pre-quiz, where you can take the quiz that first form provides. There's a quiz booklet. You have the answers in the back of your teacher answer booklet here. So take the quiz and then just ask the class verbally those questions. Um, and you can do that even right before the test. Um, I've seen master teachers do that. Um, what you don't want to do is send the quiz home with the students with the answers on it for them to study before their test. I mean, that's essentially what we've given them because what's on this test? I mean, they're asking for the principal parts, um, these grammar questions that they're worded exactly like the grammar questions that they've memorized. and then some very, very basic one-word translations. So, um, so don't hand them the test beforehand, but you can do it orally, and and in that way, you make sure that they're ready. Um, in Latin, we want students to be successful, not to the point of teaching to the test, but the test is making sure that they've covered all the essential material and mastered it. Um, and so that pre-quiz allows you uh, the 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 time to say, okay, we haven't finished with with this lesson yet, because in the pre-quiz nobody could answer, 5 of the 10 questions. So we're going to take time and work more on these grammar concepts and on memorizing this and whatever. We're going to take that time now before we come to the quiz. And so, you may spend an extra day or two solidifying a lot of this stuff, and then you can turn around um, and later and give the actual quiz. Um, eh, I neglected to mention the oral drills. Oral drills are great for the morning of the quiz. Um, it's supposed to be done once you expect mastery. Um, and every lesson in first form has an oral drill. They're not always um, in the lesson itself. There is an appendix that starts, let's see, on page, let's see, where are these oral drills? Okay, in my version, the oral drill appendix starts on page 109. And so if that oral drill is not on in the text of the lesson, it is in the back of your teacher manual, this book, and eh, and then you have those drills at your disposal with the answers. Um, so hopefully, um, I've given you a good idea. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, do your recitation and the lesson. If you can get to sections 1 and 5, great. Tuesday, recitation, vocabulary, quickly review the lesson, and do finish up sections 1 and 5. If you haven't, move on to section 2. Wednesday, finish section 2 if you need to. Do section 3. Um, Thursday, finish section 3 if you haven't. Do section 4, and then do your pretest. Obviously, sorry, in each of these days you're doing recitation and vocabulary drills as you start off, and then Friday you're gonna do your recitation, your grammar questions, and uh, and then the quiz. So uh, that's the ideal. Um, okay, I've got a question here that has been submitted. Uh, do you suggest making time for students to make vocab flashcards during class time, or even using flashcards? Um, I highly recommend flashcards. When I was studying Latin myself, they were very, very helpful. However, today they're depends on where your school is at with regards to technology. I mean, in my opinion, keep it out of the classroom. However, if you have technology uh, at your disposal, um, where you can use something like Quizlet, that is a flashcard app. Is doing exactly the same thing the flashcard is doing, um, and that way they don't have to make their own. Or you can buy the flashcards from Memoria Press and provide them. When I was a child, we made our own, and part of the school supply list was index cards, and we would just make our own. Um, and some people would get really excited and go for colored flashcards, and each color was a different lesson. And uh, but they're extremely helpful. I would not use class time to. Well, it depends on your age. If you're talking fifth, sixth, seventh graders, I would not use class time. I'd say you go home and make your flashcards, and require then the next day when they come in that they put their flashcards on their desk, as they're getting their stuff out. So then that way you can follow up and make sure each student has them, if you're going to make them. A- and because they are such an important tool to do vocab, because for a student to sit down and study a list, that's not going to be nearly as helpful as if they're using those flashcards. Because uh, I'm sure probably all of you are familiar with the system of where you would have flashcards that you would go over daily, and then um, you know once you've done them for a week, and if you go over them and you on that last day of the week and you've gotten them all down pat, you put them in another stack that you go over, let's say twice a week instead of daily, um, and then after you do those for twice a week, you can move them to weekly and then to monthly, whereas and then you're constantly adding to that daily pile, and as you mash those daily piles, they get put into less and less frequent piles. Whereas if you're just studying a list, you don't get nearly that amount of control and targeting of what you need to work on. So I would highly recommend using flashcards. In fourth grade, I probably would have them uh, do it in class. Uh, Fifth and up, the first if you're making your own, I would have them the first couple of weeks make them in class, and then have them start making them at home. Uh, so that way, because making those flashcards actually is a helpful memorizational tool, because they are writing those things out again. I mean, the workbook does make them write that vocabulary out a couple of times anyway, but writing uh, does help that does help that information enter the memory. Um, and so uh, making those flashcards actually is a helpful exercise. So hopefully that answered that question. And if you have any other questions, feel free to post them. But we've gone over the schedule, given you a good idea, hopefully, of the progression of the first form series, and that what you need to worry about, what you don't. As long as the kids are coming out of first form with the grammar forms down pat, and they can call them to mind at will, and the vocabulary mastered, that's the main portion really of first form. Second form is when we're going to get into a lot more translation, and so that will have to be targeted later. Um, and then third and fourth form translation really needs to be the main focus, and grammar, finishing up the grammar is kind of the side focus. So um, I'm I am done talking for the day with what I had ready. And if you have any further questions, I am going to hang around for the next um, 5 minutes, about 12:45. This can go longer. This can go to 1 o'clock. It can go beyond if you have further questions. Uh, but if I don't get any feedback within the next 5 minutes, then I will call it a day. So, I'm gonna mute my mic until I hear anything from you guys. Okay, I just got a question that I saw on YouTube. Could you exemplify recitation? So that's what I'm going to be answering now. So, uh, and that's a very good question, because what does that look like? When I walk into a classroom, I would say to my students, "Salvete discipuli," which means, hello, students, and they'd say, "Salve magister." If because I'm a man, if you're a woman, they'd say magistra. That's a great opportunity to talk to them the difference between masculine and feminine. Um, and then um, and then I would say surgite, or surgite omnes, which means stand up, everybody. And um, that uh, that creates a ceremony, creates type of importance to it, and also it keeps them from playing around with what's on their desk and stuff. So they stand up, and I would stand up here, but I might go out of screen, and then uh, let me take. I'm going to take here lesson 15. Just in the first form book, I'm looking right at the recitation here of what I'm going to do. So what I would do is I'd say, okay, recitemus, which means let us recite, and then I would say, okay, let's do the personal endings of the present tense. And so they would say, oh, and I would chant along right with them, O-S-T, mus, tis, unt. Okay, and so at this point, we've learned the imperfect and future endings as well. So then I would start with bomb and say, bomb, ba, spot, bomus, bot, spot. And they would all be chanting that alongside me. And then we'd go to future. And I try to get my students to be able to recognize where I can say the imperfect endings, please, and they can go into bomb. Uh, Young classes like this, a lot of times, you'll say imperfect, and they'll go, "Ah," and then and then you start with bomb, and they go, "Oh, bomb. Okay, that's what you're asking me about," and that's okay. Little by little, that'll sink in, and so we'd do the future bo bis bit, bemus bitus bunt. Um, and at this point, I think we've also learned the perfect. So then we would say the perfect isti eat, emus istis erunt. And then we go on to the pluperfect and the future perfect. Um, then the next thing on our list is the first conjugation principal part endings. So I would say, okay, the principal parts of the first conjugation, o, are, avi, atus. And then my next thing on the list here is amo, the six tenses, the principal parts. Um, so I would say, okay, let's start with the principal parts of amo, amo, amare, amavi, amatus. And then, okay, let's start with the present. Amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amat. And and you get your class into a rhythm where you don't even have to stop. You say, okay, we're doing the six tenses, and they know they're going present, imperfect, future, perfect, pluperfect, future perfect. So after we've done amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amant, then we do amabam, amabas, amabat, amabamus, amabatis, amabant. Um, Now, and then we go to amabo, amabis, amabit, amabimus, amabitis, amabunt. Now, one note about pronunciation of these forms, when you recite, um, you don't really need to worry about the pronunciation of it in the sense of technically, um, most classes would recite the imperfect amabam, amabas, amabat, amabamus, amabatis, amabant. That creates a lyrical quality, which is helpful for the student. Whereas um, for uh, whereas for me, having learned Latin from third grade on, um, that actually somewhat hurts my ears because I'm used to putting the accent on the proper syllable. That's not a worry for your students. Put that accent on that bomb and create that lyrical quality. It will help. So you go to the future, amabo, amabo, amabis, amabit, amabimus, amabitis, amabunt. And then you go to the perfect amavi, amavisti, amavit, amavimus, amavisis, amaverunt. The pluperfect amavaram, amavaras, amavarat, amavaramus, amavaratis, amavarant. And the future perfect amavaro, amavaris, amavarit, amavaremus, amavaritis, amavarent. And you can do fun things. Uh, because that Mavarent is different from the errant that students normally expect. When you get to the future perfect, you can go amavaro, amavaris, amavarit, amavaremus, amavaritis, amavarent, tent, tent, always in the active, um, which that helps solidify in their minds. This is so any fun things like that you can come up with will be helpful. And then just go through the rest of it. Dosto, Juvo, Lavo, it's asking for the principal parts. Now, sum, the six tenses, the case names. So we're going to do nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative. Wow, that was an amazing moment for me to forget the date of case. So you would go through those case names, and then it has mensa, and so you say mensa, mense, mense, mensam, mensam, mense, mensarum, mensis, mensas, mensis. Now you're going to take it at a different speed depending on where your class is at. Uh, but then when you're done, you would just say sedete, and everybody would sit down, and you would launch into your lesson. Um, and the grammar review questions, it says 1 through 76. Again, take 10 one day, 10 the next, 10 the next. And as you get through them, you don't have to do them all in a day. And so your recitation can be shorter, um, depending on, and just break it up throughout the week and try to get through it. Maybe try to get through it all 2 times in a week. Um, and obviously, in this example, lesson 14, they learned Mensa. So I'm going to make sure I recite Mensa every single day of the week until until we're until we've moved past that. I might do that for several weeks until I'm sure that they can recite Mensa in their sleep. When I get to the higher levels of third and fourth form, I would start changing things out. So they've learned Mensa um, here in fourth grade. By the time you're in sixth, seventh grade, and you're in third or fourth form, I might say let's decline Agricola, or let's decline I don't know, Roma instead of Mensa, because I you get into a pattern where where they need to be able to call that to mind no matter what word it is. And so that can be helpful to do in that way. So hopefully that helped with what a recitation looks like. Um, all right, I will wait another couple of minutes and see if anything else gets posted. Any other questions? But hopefully that was helpful with regards to the recitation. Looks like I lost you guys for a second there. I am back, so if there's any further questions, um, I'd be happy to answer them. Uh, all right. Well, at this point, I'm just gonna wrap it up. I appreciate you coming and watching this. Hopefully, it did. Hopefully, it proves useful to you. Uh, First Form is a robust program, and it has many good aspects to it. Um, we were talking about the flashcards. Those can already be provided to you. It's got pronunciation CDs, and as a teacher, the DVD can be helpful for you to watch the lesson beforehand. Uh, so there's many resources out there to try to help you. And if you have any sort of question um, halfway through the year, or as you're starting, you say, I don't know how I would implement this, I don't know how I would do that, I would be more than happy to answer those questions, because I do have familiarity with the program. And my job is to try to support classical schools. So you can email me at paul@classicallatin.org. Again, that's paul@classicallatin.org. You can email me with any questions you have about the program, transitional problems of trying to get students into it, or where you would go from here. All of those questions I'd be more than happy to answer and help you with. So I have not seen any further questions come in. So at this point, I am going to wrap it up. But you do have a way to contact me if there are any further questions or difficulties as you go through your year. Now, I'm wishing you a great school year, and we'll do another one of these in the future.